Welcome to Whispers in the Darkness, where the hidden horrors of the world are brought into the light. Today, we're diving into a story that reveals the chilling secrets lurking behind Hollywood's glitz and glamour. Beneath the red carpets and flashing lights lies a world few dare to speak of, a secret society of the elite, whispers of forbidden rituals, and a pact with darkness that offers fame at a price. This tale will take you into the shadows of the entertainment industry, where ambition meets the unimaginable. If you're as intrigued as we are by the secrets people would kill to keep hidden, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Whispers in the Darkness, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, let's uncover the truth.
I still remember the exact moment I stepped off the bus in Los Angeles, because it felt like the city was trying to swallow me whole. The heat didn't just envelope me, it assaulted my senses, wrapping around my limbs and draping over my shoulders like a suffocating blanket. I paused on the sidewalk, my cheap sneakers squeaking on the sun-baked concrete. The smell of stale cigarettes and car exhaust hit me next, sharp and acrid, the kind of smell that sticks in the back of your throat no matter how hard you swallow. Overhead, there wasn't a single cloud in the sky, just a big, empty, electric blue dome that offered zero mercy from the sun. Despite the discomfort, a thrill shot through me. My mind buzzed with all the Hollywood fantasies I'd harbored since I was a kid. Movie premieres, glittering dresses, a name in lights. I had always imagined an epic soundtrack playing the day I arrived, but the reality was just the dull whir of passing traffic and a distant car horn. No violins, no triumphant fanfare, just me, a battered suitcase, and a dog-eared dream. The suitcase itself was a testament to how far I'd come, literally and figuratively. Its once pink exterior was scuffed with grayish streaks and peeling at the corners, showing the raw cardboard beneath. My parents had given it to me as a high school graduation gift, hoping it would be used for better, safer things, as my dad put it. By safer things, he meant traveling to a practical college, maybe a teaching program or a nursing school. Instead, I had stuffed all my hopes inside it and headed straight for Tinseltown. I've always wanted to be an actress, for as long as I can remember. My earliest memories revolve around me stealing the living room as my personal stage, dancing or singing or reciting lines from TV shows, while my older brother Mark rolled his eyes and escaped to his bedroom. By the time I hit middle school, I was performing in every school play, from Shakespeare adaptations, though we barely understood them, to modern musicals. My teachers encouraged me, telling me I had it, the spark or presence that supposedly set me apart. My mother, on the other hand, offered wary support, reminding me that the world was a dangerous place, full of people ready to take advantage of bright-eyed girls with big dreams. Dad was quieter about the whole endeavor, giving gruff nods when I mentioned auditions and letting out long sighs whenever the topic of Los Angeles came up. When I finally landed in L.A. at 20, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. I saw the frown lines on my mom's face deepen the morning I left. She forced a tight smile and gripped my hands as if they were lifelines. I remember her exact words, "Don't lose yourself out there, Lily." Then she pressed a small silver cross into my palm, something that had once belonged to my grandmother. I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't much for religion, but I kept it anyway. Maybe, in some way, I wanted the protection it symbolized. The first place I found to live was a cramped studio in a run-down building a few blocks from a busy intersection. It was the cheapest thing I could afford, and it still felt overpriced. The landlord, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, gave me a key and a suspicious glance. When I stepped inside my new home, the first thing that hit me was the stale, musty smell, like old socks, fried food, and cheap disinfectant sloppily masking 100 other odors I couldn't name. The carpet was matted and stained in odd shapes. Some resembled rust, others dark smudges that might have been coffee or something more ominous. A single overhead light flickered whenever I toggled the switch, and the tiny window overlooked a dirty alley strewn with garbage bins. The entire place felt like a far cry from the bright farmland of my Midwestern hometown, where the cornfields stretched out endlessly under open skies. At night, I quickly learned that L.A. never truly sleeps. I'd lie awake on the thin mattress I'd salvaged from a thrift store, listening to bursts of laughter from drunk passers-by, shrieking tires, and the occasional pop-pop of what I wasn't entirely sure were fireworks. More than once, sirens howled down the main road a block away, making me jolt up in bed, adrenaline flooding my veins. My heart would pound until the screams of emergency vehicles faded into the distance. Still, I told myself this was all part of the grand pursuit. I was a stranger in a new city, and even if it was rough around the edges, it was where I needed to be. Every morning, I'd wake up early, splash water on my face in the grimy bathroom sink, and stare at my reflection determined. For a moment, I'd take stock of myself, a young woman, barely out of her teens, with shoulder-length brown hair that had a tendency to frizz in the LA humidity. I'm not tall, maybe 5'4" on a good day, but people have told me I project a certain presence, an intensity in my dark brown eyes, that can be both captivating and intimidating. My freckles are faint, scattered across my nose and cheeks, souvenirs from years spent under the Midwest sun. I might not be a classic bombshell, but there was a fierceness in me, or so I believed. The strength of wanting something so badly it almost burns. I decided that's what would set me apart. Days started to blur together in a cycle of auditions, disappointments, and double shifts at a dive bar a few neighborhoods away. It was a dingy place with scuffed floors and a neon sign that blinked half its letters, like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up entirely. The bar reeked of spilled beer, stale cigarettes, and that cloying sweetness from the cheap cologne wafting off the regular patrons. Most nights, I had to swat away groping hands or dodge lecherous leers. The tips were meager, but I couldn't afford to lose the job. Rent, groceries, bus fare, everything added up fast. Auditions were a different kind of gauntlet. I'd sit in cramped waiting rooms with rows of plastic chairs, all filled with wide-eyed hopefuls clutching script. Many of the girls were taller, blonder, or just plain more confident than I was. The guys all seemed to have perfect bone structure, and that SoCal tan. Sometimes, it felt like I was drowning in a sea of perfect faces. Casting directors often eyed me with polite disinterest, like they'd already decided I wasn't what they were looking for before I opened my mouth. Next, they'd call or, "Don't call us, we'll call you," as I tried to swallow my pride and slink back out the door. Every time I felt my resolve waver, I remembered performing in my high school's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, where I'd played Hermia. My drama teacher, Dalton, told me afterward, "You have a gift, Lily. Don't let this town hold you back." She'd meant our hometown, of course, but I took it as a universal truth. If I didn't let my own small-town mindset hold me back, maybe I could achieve something far greater. That memory became my armor-me invisible shield against the waves of rejection that battered me daily. But the weeks bled into months, and the months started to feel like an endless extension of the same day. I'd watch other aspiring actors announce callbacks, roles, and small successes on social media. They'd post photos of themselves on set, or hanging out with minor celebrities. I followed them with something close to obsession, comparing myself to every toned physique and beaming selfie, scrutinizing each new like they received. My own profile was a graveyard of half-hearted updates, and a smattering of headshots that seemed to go nowhere. My parents, back home, were supportive in the way distant people are. They'd send texts once or twice a week asking if I was okay, if I had eaten properly, if I was sure I didn't want to come back. Sometimes I craved the comfort of my mom's cooking, the fresh air of wide-open fields, and the quiet nights broken only by the chirping of crickets. But I also knew returning home meant giving up. And I refused to be seen as the cautionary tale another small-town girl who tried to make it big and slunk back with her tail between her legs. Yet, deep down, I felt an ache. I was alone among millions of strangers, burning through my meager savings and draining my energy on fruitless auditions. Each day, my hope diminished a little more, replaced by a creeping sense of futility. Sometimes I questioned whether I'd made a colossal mistake, whether my mother's worried eyes and my father's resigned sighs had been right all along. In my darker moments, I stood at the cracked mirror in my dingy bathroom, stared at my reflection, and asked, "Who are you kidding, Lily?" The mirror's glass was scratched and spotted with age, warping my features. I thought I saw flickers of doubt in my eyes, a heaviness tugging at my cheeks, lines forming prematurely across my brow. I'd pinched the silver cross in my pocket, Grandma's cross, and try to conjure some sense of hope. But it was fleeting, overshadowed by the smell of roaches in the walls and the thunder of traffic outside my window. Still, I soldiered on. Every shift at the bar, every humiliating audition, every night I forced myself to practice lines from scripts I downloaded for free online. It was all part of my plan, I told myself. I'd pay my dues, tough it out, and when I made it, if I made it, these stories would be part of the legend I'd spin. I'd talk about the sacrifices, the grit, and how I never gave up. That was the dream anyway. Reality, however, was a far cry from the golden fantasies I once held. Staring out of the grimy bus window each morning, I'd watch the city roll by in a blur of concrete, chain-link fences, and palm trees swaying in the smoggy haze. I couldn't help but wonder if the sparkle I sought was just an illusion, a distant glimmer on a horizon I might never reach. But I was here now. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. One foot in front of the other, one audition at a time. With the cross in my pocket and a whisper of hope in my heart, I braced myself for whatever came next. After all, chasing a dream isn't supposed to be easy. And I was determined to see this through, Kevin, if it cost me far more than I ever bargained for. Part 2. Meeting Jack, and the Circle First-Person POV. 1. 0 words. I remember the damp, claustrophobic hallway of the audition space most vividly, the walls painted an unforgiving shade of brownish gray that seemed to sap my energy the moment I walked in. A single ceiling fan spun lazily, barely moving the stale air. I had shown up early, determined not to miss my chance for even the smallest role in a low-budget horror flick. My nerves jangled, and I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck. Sitting there with about 20 other actors felt like joining a silent support group for overworked dreamers. We tried not to make eye contact, each of us silently practicing lines and fidgeting with scripts. At one point, a short, harried casting assistant barreled through the corridor, mumbling names and times, her lanyard bouncing against her chest with each step. That's when I first noticed him, Jack. He was leaning against the chipped wall, arms crossed, looking strangely at ease in the middle of all that tension. His dark hair was styled in that effortless way that probably took him half a morning to achieve, and his eyes, a piercing green, seemed to track me from across the hall. Even from a distance, I could sense a low-level current of confidence radiating off him, a certainty in his stance that I found both mesmerizing and intimidating. We ended up sitting 2 seats apart on a row of battered plastic chairs. I glanced at him shyly, trying not to stare. He tilted his head in greeting, offering me a small, encouraging smile. Something in my chest fluttered, maybe just the relief of a friendly face. By the time my name was finally called and I stood up, he gave me a little wink. That was all. Just a quick, playful gesture, but it was enough to kickstart the hope I'd been struggling to keep alive. Inside the audition room, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing everyone out in a ghostly glow. A jaded casting director flipped through my headshots with the barest flicker of interest, and I did my best to deliver my lines with conviction. When the ordeal was over, and I stumbled back into the corridor, Jack was still there. "You did good," he said softly, as if sharing a secret. "I could hear you through the door." "Thanks," I managed. My pulse hammered in my ears. I think I messed up a line or two." He shrugged, a half-smile curving his lips. A moment later, the casting assistant called his name. He sauntered into the audition room, leaving me with an odd sense of anticipation. Something told me I would see him again, and I felt my heart lift, if only for a moment. Sure enough, we ran into each other outside, in the scruffy parking lot behind the building. The hot midday sun bounced off the asphalt in shimmering waves. Jack had a bottle of water in one hand, and he offered it to me. "You look like you could use a drink." I chuckled, accepting the bottle. "You have no idea." We ended up talking for nearly an hour about the audition, about the city, about how he'd recently landed a small role in an indie film that had gotten some buzz at a festival. The conversation felt electric, alive, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by self-doubt. Jack's voice carried an undercurrent of excitement, like he was on the verge of something big, and the energy was contagious. Before we parted ways, we exchanged numbers. "Let's grab coffee sometime," he suggested. I nodded, a little stunned that someone as put together as Jack would be interested in spending more time with me. But I wasn't about to question my luck. A few nights later, we ended up at a bustling cafe in Hollywood. It was one of those places where aspiring screenwriters hunch over laptops, sipping overpriced lattes, hoping to crack their big script. The walls were lined with black and white portraits of long-dead movie stars Garbo, Chaplin, Monroe, and every seat was filled with someone who looked like they'd kill for a break. Jack ushered me to a quiet corner table, his hand lightly on the small of my back. I can't lie, I liked the warmth of his touch, the gentle guidance it offered. Over the rim of my coffee cup, I studied him more carefully. The angular set of his jaw, the gentle curve of his lips when he listened, and most notably, his eyes. They shone with a strange fervor, as if he carried within him a secret that both thrilled and frightened him. "You've got real talent, Lily," he said, leaning closer so I could hear him above the chatter. "Most of them can't hold a candle to you." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a soft warmth flood my chest. It wasn't just flattery, it felt like he believed it. "Thank you," I whispered, fighting back the sudden urge to cry. It had been so long since anyone in this town gave me genuine encouragement. "Just don't give up, okay?" His expression turned serious. "Because Hollywood will eat you alive if you let it." A chill ran down my spine at the warning in his voice, but he quickly switched gears, asking about my background, my family, and what I loved most about acting. We talked until the cafe began to close, and the baristas started stacking chairs on tabletops. The first party he took me to was something I never could have imagined, not even in my wildest daydreams. We drove up winding roads into the Hollywood Hills, passing mansions lit like fortresses against the dark. When we arrived, my breath caught in my throat. The house was more castle than mansion, with towering pillars, immaculate lawns, and a glimmering pool in the courtyard. As we stepped through the grand foyer, everything smelled of wealth-like expensive perfume mingled with polished marble. Soft golden lights illuminated the space, and a gentle hum of music rolled through the rooms, punctuated by bursts of laughter. Celebrities I recognized from magazines and Instagram strolled around as though this were just another Friday night. Someone offered me a crystal flute of champagne, and I sipped gingerly, nearly choking on the bubbles. I tried to focus on the thrill of being there, of finally, for once, not feeling like an outsider in this city. Jack introduced me to a group of models and up-and-coming actors who all seemed to share an inside joke, laughing at references I didn't catch. Despite their easy smiles and air kisses, something felt slightly off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way their laughter sometimes died too soon, or the hushed conversations in corners. At one point, a tall red-headed model walked by, her hair cascading down her back in perfect waves. Around her neck hung a pendant carved out of black onyx. It glinted ominously in the ambient light, shaped like a strange symbol, a circle with jagged lines cutting through it. My stomach clenched, and I didn't know why. Something about that pendant seemed out of place, almost menacing. I shrugged off the unease, reminding myself I was lucky just to be there. This was the kind of party I'd dreamed of, the sort of glamorous gathering that could open doors if I made the right impression. But even as I tried to enjoy the moment, I couldn't ignore the unsettling little details. In the hallway, I passed a small group huddled close, whispering urgently. They fell silent when I walked by. From a distant room, there was a burst of raucous laughter that ended abruptly, as if someone had slapped a hand over their mouth. Jack, always attentive, found me by the edge of the pool, where I stood gazing at the reflections of glittering lights on the water's surface. "You okay?" he asked, gently tapping my shoulder. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just taking it all in." He nodded, his green eyes probing mine. "It can be overwhelming at first, but trust me, you belong here as much as anyone else." Part of me wanted to believe that. I wanted to be part of the so-called in crowd, to slip seamlessly into a world of designer clothes and star-studded connections. Yet, the more I tried to relax, the more I sensed an undercurrent running through the place, like the quiet hum of tension beneath the glamour. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't I exactly where I'd hoped to be? So, I pushed the uneasy feelings aside. Instead, I let Jack lead me through the mansion, introducing me to people who nodded in approval and offered cryptic compliments. Maybe my big break was closer than I thought. Maybe this was my ticket to finally stepping out of the shadows of obscurity. And if I had to ignore a few ominous vibes here and there, well, it seemed a small price to pay. I couldn't shake a vague sense of dread curling around the edges of my consciousness, but that night, the champagne and the attention dulled it enough. As we left the party in the early hours of the morning, the city sprawled below us like an endless sea of light. Jack squeezed my hand and smiled, and for a moment, I allowed myself to dream that this was the start of something beautiful. Yet, deep down, I felt that faint, haunting tremor, like the city itself was whispering a warning I couldn't quite decipher. Looking back, I realized that party was a turning point. It was the first time I tasted the sweet, intoxicating promise of Hollywood's inner circle, and the first time I felt the unsettling shadows beneath. Even then, part of me sensed something lurking in the corners, watching. But like a moth drawn to the flame, I was too captivated by the brightness to heed the darkness waiting just beyond. I grew up in a place where folks still gathered for Sunday service and potluck suppers, where the church bells rang at noon to remind everyone who they belonged to. My mom taught Sunday school, and I'd grown up memorizing verses as soon as I could read. The idea of burning things in a bonfire for any reason other than s'mores or a summer cookout would have been shocking to my family, to say the least. And yet there I stood barefoot on cool flagstones, night air crisp against my skin, surrounded by a circle of new friends, chanting softly at the dancing flames. Jack and his crowd called these gatherings team-building exercises, a way to clear emotional baggage and make room for success. It sounded wholesome enough if you didn't think too hard. And I guess I didn't want to think too hard. I was just riding the high of my budding momentum in Hollywood. My entire life, I'd been taught that dabbling in strange spiritual stuff was a slippery slope, but standing in that circle, the city lights twinkling in the valley below, I felt powerful. Or maybe I just felt included in something bigger than me, and that was enough to silence the alarms going off in the back of my mind. We were at some producer's house, tucked away in a canyon estate with looming pines and a high stone wall. I remember how the wind rustled the treetops, sounding like a chorus of whispers. In the center of the courtyard, a small bonfire hissed and popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The group, maybe a dozen or so, formed a ring around the flames. Jack stood beside me, fingers interlaced with mine, offering a reassuring squeeze every time my courage wavered. "Burn your past," he told us in that gentle yet commanding voice he used when he wanted to inspire. "This is how we let go of what's holding us back." We were supposed to bring token something that represented a painful memory or a regret. I hadn't known what to choose, so I brought an old photograph of myself at 16, posed in front of my family's barn with my first boyfriend. I'd kept it out of nostalgia, but also guilt. That relationship had ended in heartbreak, and I always felt I'd never fully moved on. I walked toward the fire, holding the photo gingerly. A lump formed in my throat because it suddenly felt like I was discarding a piece of who I was. But I pressed forward, stepping over scattered pine needles that crunched under my bare feet. One by one, we fed our tokens to the flames. The photograph crinkled on the edges, the glossy surface warping under the heat. Smoke curled around me, stinging my eyes and forcing me to blink. At first, it smelled like pine resin until a new scent drifted in, sharp and metallic, reminding me uncomfortably of a slaughterhouse I once visited on a school trip. Beneath the chemical and wood smoke lingered something else, something wet and feral. My stomach clenched, but I told myself it was just some synthetic fabric or plastic getting burned. No big deal. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I glanced at Jack, who offered a radiant smile. "It's supposed to feel intense," he murmured, leaning closer. "Don't fight it." I nodded, swallowing my apprehension. In my mind, I tried to picture these gatherings as a quirky bonding ritual of fun, if odd, group activity. After all, what could be so wrong about letting go of your past? Growing up in the Bible Belt, the only ritual I'd been taught was baptism, and the occasional laying on of hands in prayer circles. This was different. But I'd come so far. I wanted to fit in. And the more I convinced myself it was just harmless make-believe, the more I believed it. After that bonfire, things changed for me, so fast it made my head spin. Suddenly, casting calls seemed to fall out of the sky. I'd check my email and find back-to-back invitations to audition for roles that were leagues ahead of the tiny spots I'd been getting. Producers who hadn't given me the time of day before now greeted me with warm smiles and polite interest. I booked a minor role in a TV pilot, then landed another in a streaming series. My phone buzzed incessantly with social media alerts, as if the world had discovered me overnight. Online articles popped up with my name in them: Lily, the rising star. It was flattering, exhilarating, and just a little bit terrifying. I told myself I deserved it. I'd worked hard after all. I had spent countless nights memorizing lines until my eyes burned, and endless mornings trudging through cattle call auditions with no guarantee of a callback. Part of me felt like I'd earned this streak of good fortune, even if the speed and scope of it seemed a little unreal. Another part of me, quieter but more insistent, kept asking, why now? What changed? And every time I wondered that, I recalled the pungent smoke at the bonfire, the group chanting words I couldn't understand, and the eerie hush that fell right before we set our tokens ablaze. But I wasn't about to question my good luck. For the first time since arriving in LA, I felt like I was actually making progress. My mom called, her voice quavering with a mix of excitement and worry. I saw you on a local news segment, sweetie. Are you okay out there? You sure you're not getting in over your head? I laughed off her concerns, assuring her I was fine. And maybe I believed it in that moment. Still, there were tiny cracks in my bright new reality. At first, I thought I was just jittery from the sudden success, but then I started seeing things. In the mirror, sometimes, I'd catch a flicker of motion that didn't match my reflection. I'd blink, and it would be gone, leaving me shaken. Other times, when I was alone in my apartment, I had the unsettling sensation that someone was standing right behind me, watching. I'd spin around, heart pounding, only to find empty space. I tried to brush it off as stress or lack of sleep, telling myself I was just spooked from auditioning for all those horror projects. The nightmares were worse though. They felt visceral, like I was living through them. In these dreams, I lay paralyzed in bed while a tall, shadowy figure hovered at my feet. It never spoke, but I sensed an ancient malice emanating from it, as though it had existed for centuries, and now it had found me. I'd wake drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around my limbs. For the life of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home from those rituals. Jack noticed my unease. After one particularly bad nightmare, he found me sitting on my couch at 3 a.m, staring blankly at the wall. "You okay?" he asked, voice laced with concern. His presence usually comforted me. There was something grounding about the warmth of his smile. I confided in him about the bad dreams, but kept the more disturbing details to myself. He just nodded, rubbing circles on my back. "Don't worry," he whispered. "Everything's moving so quickly for you. It's normal to feel a little overwhelmed. Besides," he added with a playful wink, "this town practically runs on illusions." Words. I never imagined it would be so easy for the world to turn against me. The night I fled that mansion with the leather-bound journal pressed to my chest, I told myself I had to act quickly, expose everything before the patron's claws sunk in any deep. My fingers still shook, recalling the smell of old paper and the horrifying words describing deals signed in blood. I believed people would listen, that they'd see how dark and twisted Hollywood had become. I was so naive. I reached out to a reporter named Marcella Winter, a well-known pit bull in the entertainment industry who'd tackled powerful producers before. If anyone could blow this open, I thought, it was. We met in the back corner of a dimly lit bar off Sunset Boulevard, its neon sign flickering pink and blue like a failing heartbeat. I slid photocopied pages across the sticky table, trying to steady my trembling hand. Symbols scrawled in black ink leered up at me, each line etched with menace. I explained it all to Marcella. The rituals, the patron, the final offering. My voice broke more than once. Marcella listened with the mask-like calm of someone who'd seen too many horrors already. She jotted down notes in a well-worn spiral-bound pad, her eyes narrowing with interest. "I've heard rumors about something like this," she said quietly, tucking the copies into her purse. "But not with this level of detail. I'll look into it." Hope flared in my chest. Part of me still believed in truth and justice, probably a remnant of my Bible Belt upbringing. I thought, maybe the devil can lose this round. 3 days later, everything imploded. Instead of publishing a bombshell exposé, the gossip rags erupted with a different story. Lily is a delusional drug addict who fabricated bizarre cult accusations to hide her own mental breakdown. Everywhere I turned, I saw twisted headlines mocking me. Overnight, I went from a promising actress on the rise to a laughingstock, fragile, unstable, anti-Semitic. Casting directors who'd once been intrigued ghosted me as though I'd never existed. My phone buzzed non-stop with social media alerts, each new message more hostile than the last. "You're washed up before you even started. Crazy bitch, get help. Junk. Stop lying for attention. Anti-Semitic trash. I hope you rot." My blood ran cold at how easily strangers flung vile accusations, each word another stab wound. Part of me wanted to respond, to scream the truth at them, but I knew it would only feed the fire. The narrative had been set, and I was powerless to stop it. My agent dropped me with a curt email, citing unprofessional behavior and not wanting to jeopardize her industry relationships. Even my so-called friends in LA vanished. It felt like living in a glass cage, everyone peering in, passing judgment on a spectacle I couldn't control. That night, I was jerked out of a restless sleep by an odd cracking sound echoing through my apartment. My heart nearly leapt out of my throat. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the cramped living room. I forced myself out of bed, my spine rigid with dread. I flicked on a lamp. Nothing was out of place at first, but as I neared the window, I saw it. A series of jagged lines etched into the glass. My stomach dropped. The symbol was unmistakable. I'd glimpsed it on pendants, in the journal, in half-hidden tattoos peeking from under partygoers' sleeves. A circle split by crooked angles, something that made my skin crawl. It hadn't been there before I went to bed. My veins turned to ice. I pressed my hand to the carving, shaking so hard my nails scraped the glass. Who could have done this? The window was still locked from the inside. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a cult symbol carved into my window. I could practically hear them laughing, or worse, dismissing me as a paranoid lunatic. Still, desperation won out. I dialed 911, rambling about a break-in. 2 uniformed officers showed up, glancing around the dingy apartment with utter disinterest. One of them jotted a few notes, then shrugged. "Could be neighborhood kids messing around," he said. I caught the way he eyed me, taking in my disheveled hair, the tremor in my voice. He didn't believe me, and after 5 minutes of perfunctory questioning, they left. My head pounded with anxiety. They, the circle, the patron, whoever was behind this, were tightening the noose, showing me how easily they could reach into my life, sabotage my reputation, and rattle my sanity. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under my feet. That was when my phone rang. "Mom," my heart thumped unevenly. The last time we'd spoken, she'd been worried but supportive, telling me to pray for guidance. Now I was terrified of what she might have heard. Swallowing back tears, I braced myself and answered. "Lily?" Her voice came through the static, trembling with tension. "Sweetheart, what in the world is going on with you?" I read these horrible articles saying you're on drugs, that you hate. Oh my goodness, anti-Semitism? Lily, how can they say these things about my... I closed my eyes. Guilt and relief tangled in my chest. Mom, it's a smear campaign, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Someone's trying to discredit me. But I promise, it's not true. None of it. Her silence stretched for a few seconds, thick with disbelief and worry. Are you okay? She finally asked. Really okay? I let out a slow, shaky breath. I'm dealing with it. It's been rough. But I'm not using drugs or anything like that, I swear. She let out a sigh that crackled over the phone. I don't like this, Lily. I don't like you being out there alone with no one to watch your back. I told your brother Mark about it. You know he's got that delivery run to Los Angeles tomorrow hauling those tractor parts. On his way back, he'll come get you if you're up for it. Maybe a break would do you good. For a moment, I felt a fierce pull of longing. Images of home flashed through my mind, Mom's warm kitchen, the smell of biscuits in the oven, the endless fields where I used to run barefoot as a kid. But then the fear clawed at me. If I leave, the patron might turn on my family. Or what if they follow me? Bring this evil back home. My chest went tight. Mom, I'm not sure, I murmured. I don't want to drag Mark into this mess, it's complicated. My vision blurred with tears I struggled to hold back. It's safer for everyone if I stay here and try to handle it. That's nonsense, she insisted, her tone more forceful than I expected. I raised you to know better than to lie to your mama, Lily. You're not safe there. I can hear it in your voice. Let Mark take you somewhere you can rest, get your head straight, and figure out your next move. Promise me you'll think about it? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Okay, I'll think about it, I lied, knowing full well the possibility of leaving might be the only rational lifeline I had left. But a sick dread coiled in my stomach at the idea of my brother barreling into this nightmare. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. Mom exhaled slowly, like she was trying to push out all the worry trapped in her lungs. All right, sweetheart. I love you. We all do. Just keep your phone on, okay? Mark'll call you tomorrow. I love you too, I whispered, hanging up before the trembling in my voice betrayed how close I was to breaking down completely. I set the phone aside, heart pounding. The bitterness of fear mixed with the fleeting sweetness of my mom's concern. The idea of leaving gnawed at me. Could I really afford to stay in a city that felt more and more haunted by each passing day? But the alternative, risking my family's lives by drawing them into the patron's orbit, seemed even more terrifying. A breeze blew in from the window, rustling the edges of that sinister carving. My reflection hovered there in the pane, superimposed over the symbol. I looked half crazed, all dark-rimmed eyes and pale cheek, unrecognizable from the bright-eyed girl who'd first stepped off that bus. I pressed a shaky hand to the glass. They haven't beaten me yet, I told myself, though my own voice sounded small in my head. But the city's lights beyond my window felt oppressive tonight, as if every bulb was another watchful eye. And just below that hum of electricity, I could sense the patron's presence like a razor-thin blade hovering inches from my throat. The phone call had offered a sliver of hope, yet it also made one thing crystal clear. My family was in the crosshairs now, and if the circle demanded a final offering, I had no doubt they could and would reach across state lines to enforce. Alone in the flickering light of my living room, I vowed silently, I'll find a way to fight back. But for the first time I truly wondered if some darkness was simply too vast to outrun, whether I was destined to become just another cautionary tale in Hollywood's long history of shattered dreams. The black etchings on the window seemed to leer in agreement. I nodded, leaning my head on his shoulder. He was right, wasn't he? Illusions were part of the package in Hollywood, the glitz, the glamour, the rumors and tall tales. The bonfires and chanting, I told myself, were just a silly brand of manifestation. Maybe the fancy houses, the big breaks, and the hush-hush gatherings were all part of a larger social game. I could handle it. I was no longer the naive girl fresh off the bus, after all. In the back of my mind, though, an uncomfortable truth gnawed at me. Something dark was unfolding, and I was too caught up in my own thrill to see it clearly. Every success I racked up felt a little more precarious, as if each triumph came with an invisible thread attaching me to something I'd never asked for and didn't understand. That gnawing unease only grew stronger with each new invitation to another team-building night, each discreet hint that deeper levels of the ritual awaited. Yet the promise of more opportunities kept me numb to the warnings flickering in my dreams. I clung to my newfound status, my bright future, and the camaraderie of Jack's circle. It was easier to ignore the shadows around me than to face the possibility that I might be dancing with something truly sinister. In time, I would look back at those moments and wonder how I ever missed the signs, how I let the allure of success blind me to the creeping shadows in my peripheral vision. For now, though, I was riding the wave of my burgeoning career, oblivious to the fact that the crest of that wave would eventually send me crashing into depths I could never have imagined. And with each new whisper in the dark, each black flicker in the mirror's corner, I was drawn deeper into a realm where the cost of success wouldn't be measured in dollars or hours, but in something far more precious and far more terrifying. I can still feel how my whole body buzzed with adrenaline that night, my pulse roaring in my ears. It was supposed to be just another lavish after-party at another celebration for people who'd suddenly found themselves on the meteoric rise to fame. The mansion belonged to some industry mogul, all glass walls and modern art. I remember slipping away from the noise and clamor to find a moment of quiet. My nerve endings felt raw, like I'd touched a live wire. Something had been gnawing at me for weeks, a sense that I was racing headlong into darkness without fully grasping why. That was when I stumbled into a private study. The heavy door creaked open, revealing walls lined with towering bookshelves packed with leather-bound tomes that smelled of dust and secrets. Jack's bag was on the desk, half unzipped, and my eyes flicked over it. A part of me knew I should respect his privacy, but something in me, a desperate need for answers, overrode that hesitation. With trembling hands, I unzipped the bag further and extracted a worn, leather-bound journal. Its cover was so old that the edges had begun to peel, revealing layers of brittle, faded material underneath. My breath caught in my throat. The pages inside were filled with the same alien symbols I'd seen etched into pendants, scribbled on party invitations, even lit up on some smartphone screens belonging to the circle's inner members. Now, up close, I could see the intricacies, twisting lines and half-familiar runes that seemed to glare at me from the page. My fingers went cold as I started to read. The script was archaic, but the English translations in the margins told me everything I needed to know. It spoke of the patron, an entity older than any known god. A devourer of souls. The exact words made my stomach lurch. Page after page detailed the contract, a binding arrangement that guaranteed fame, fortune, influence, whatever your heart desired, so long as you kept feeding the patron fresh offerings. My eyes skimmed over phrases like blood tithe and sacrifice of the beloved, each sentence more horrifying than the last. Nothing was free, not even in Hollywood. I felt a sick wave of understanding crash over me. Every success I'd enjoyed suddenly felt tainted, like rancid meat dressed up to look appetizing. I dropped onto a velvet armchair in the corner and read on, each flick of the page twisting my gut tighter. The final offering, the journal explained, had to be intimate someone loved, someone cherished, or at least someone valued enough that their absence would tear at your soul. My pulse hammered so hard it throbbed behind my eyes. I could almost feel my blood pressure spike, fear scraping against the inside of my skull. My hands shook so violently that the journal threatened to slip from my grasp. I slammed it shut, heart thundering against my ribs. This was what I'd been part of all along. Bile rose in my throat. My God, what had I done? Suddenly, the door opened. Jack stepped in, shutting it behind him with a soft click. His face was a thundercloud of anger and dread. He saw the journal in my hands and let out a tremulous sigh. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My mouth felt too dry to form words. "Lily," he began, voice raw. I can explain." I shot to my feet, eyes locked on him. I wanted to hurl the journal at his chest. Instead, I just stood there, choking on terror and betrayal. "Explain?" I whispered hoarsely. "How could you keep this from me?" He stepped closer, his own eyes wide, glossy with something like regret. "I didn't want you to know," he said, sounding defeated. "Because, once you do, there's no escaping it." "There has to be a way," I snapped. I didn't sign up for this." My voice shook, tears scorching my eyes. "These are blood deals, Jack. People die." Jack let out a breath that trembled on its way out. "People die every day in this town, Lily," he said softly. He motioned to the journal. "You've seen the names. You've read the stories. You think those accidents are random?" I stared at him, remembering the horrific anecdotes I'd glossed over in the margins. A star who'd pushed for a break in his contract and then wound up in a fiery car crash, so intense. His body was only identifiable through dental records. An actor who'd grown famous in a movie about a vengeful bird he'd died on set after accidentally shooting himself with a prop gun that had been mysteriously loaded with live rounds. No one had ever been charged, and rumors swirled that he was suicidal. But the journal hinted at a different truth. His attempt to renege on his part of the bargain had come at a steep cost. "You think these were all coincidences, Lily?" Jack's tone darkened as he took another step forward, desperation edging his voice. "No, they're reminders, warnings. You make the deal, you take the gifts, and if you try to run," he let the sentence hang in the air, the implication crashing over me like a wave of ice water. A shaky breath raked through my chest. "We can get out," I tried, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "We can leave L.A., call the cops, go to the press." Jack laughed bitterly. "Go to the press? They're in on it, Lily. Editors, producers, stars, half the people you follow on Instagram. Do you think I wanted this? This entire city is under the patron's sway. I barely sleep at night knowing what I've done." "Then why keep doing it?" My voice rose, cracking like dried leaves. "Because it's what you wanted," he said flatly. "You wanted fame. You wanted to be on those screens, wanted people to chant your name. Or am I wrong? His gaze bored into mine, guilt and frustration colliding on his face. You could have walked away from the parties at any point, but you didn't. You stayed. You burned your token in the fire. He grabbed the journal from the desk and flipped to a page with a column of names. You signed your spirit over, just like the rest of us, by participating. Don't you see? Every step you took deeper into this circle was a choice. My throat closed up. I wanted to deny it, to claim ignorance, but the truth was that I had stayed even after sensing the dark undercurrents. I had let the glamour and the promises of success blind me. I dismissed the creeping dread that followed me, soothing myself with illusions and rationalizations. What now? I managed, voice trembling. What does the patron want next? Jack's eyes slid shut for a moment, as if steeling himself for a confession. The final offering, he said quietly. A loved one, a person that matters to you. He opened his eyes, jaw tight. I'm sorry, Lily, but it's too late to back out. You made the pact. If you try to run, you'll end up like those people in the journal. A faint buzzing filled my ears, and for a second, I thought I might pass out. My mind flashed through images of my family back home, Mom, who still ended every phone call with a Bible verse. My dad, who quietly worried over me, though he never said it out loud. My two older brothers, who'd always teased me but had my back when it counted. Any one of them could be a target. The patron didn't care about the specifics, only that the sacrifice cut deep. Tears blurred my vision. I won't. A shudder ran through my body. I'll die before I let them have my family. Jack looked at me with an anguish so profound it hurt to see. Dying isn't the worst thing the patron can do, he said softly. It can take your soul, Lily twist it into something unrecognizable. Trust me when I say there are fates far worse than death in this deal. I wanted to scream, to rage, to collapse. Instead, a numbness settled over me, like a protective shield. We'll figure something out, I said, fighting the urge to break down. I don't care how powerful this thing is. There has to be a way. The corners of Jack's mouth twitched upward in a sad smile. I admire your fight, Lily, he whispered. But you have no idea how deep this goes. Neither of us said another word. Outside, I could hear the muted bass of the party, distant laughter echoing through the mansion's corridors. But in that study, the air felt thick with dread. My world had cracked wide open, and there was no unseeing the black chasm beneath us. I tucked the journal under my arm, ignoring Jack's attempt to snatch it back. He didn't fight me too hard, maybe he was too broken, or maybe he wanted me to fully understand the horror we were in. As I turned to leave, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon us, some malignant force sensing my discovery. In that moment, my illusions crumbled. This wasn't just a handful of misguided eccentrics chanting around bonfires for good luck. This was a pact with an ancient darkness, woven through the fabric of Hollywood itself, and I was part of it now, whether I liked it or not. I fled the study with the journal pressed against my chest, Jack trailing behind me. Every step I took felt like I was wading through quicksand. I had no idea where I was going, only that my life had irrevocably changed. The patron demanded a sacrifice, and I'd inadvertently put my family in its sight. As I left the mansion and slipped back into the neon haze of the city, my mind spun with one consuming thought. How do you outrun a demon that rules your every breath? The night seemed darker, the smog thicker, the city's lights somehow more predatory. I realized then that my rise to stardom was nothing more than a slow descent into nightmare. And I wasn't sure I would ever escape. I never imagined it would be so easy for the world to turn against me. The night I left that mansion with the leather-bound journal pressed to my chest, I told myself I had to act quickly, expose everything before the patron's claws could tighten around my life any further. My fingers still shook, recalling the smell of old paper and the horrifying words describing deals signed in blood. I believed people would listen, that they'd see how dark and twisted Hollywood had become. I was so naive. Words. I never imagined it would be so easy for the world to turn against me. The night I fled that mansion with the leather-bound journal pressed to my chest, I told myself I had to act quickly, expose everything before the patron's claws sunk in any deep. My fingers still shook, recalling the smell of old paper and the horrifying words describing deals signed in blood. I believed people would listen, that they'd see how dark and twisted Hollywood had become. I was so naive. I reached out to a reporter named Marcella Winter, a well-known pit bull in the entertainment industry who'd tackled powerful producers before. If anyone could blow this open, I thought, it was. We met in the back corner of a dimly lit bar off Sunset Boulevard, its neon sign flickering pink and blue like a failing heartbeat. I slid photocopied pages across the sticky table, trying to steady my trembling hand. Symbols scrawled in black ink leered up at me, each line etched with menace. I explained it all to Marcella. The rituals, the patron, the final offering. My voice broke more than once. Marcella listened with the mask-like calm of someone who'd seen too many horrors already. She jotted down notes in a well-worn spiral-bound pad, her eyes narrowing with interest. "I've heard rumors about something like this," she said quietly, tucking the copies into her purse. "But not with this level of detail. I'll look into it." Hope flared in my chest. Part of me still believed in truth and justice, probably a remnant of my Bible Belt upbringing. I thought, maybe the devil can lose this round. 3 days later, everything imploded. Instead of publishing a bombshell exposé, the gossip rags erupted with a different story. Lily is a delusional drug addict who fabricated bizarre cult accusations to hide her own mental breakdown. Everywhere I turned, I saw twisted headlines mocking me. Overnight, I went from a promising actress on the rise to a laughingstock, fragile, unstable, anti-Semitic. Casting directors who'd once been intrigued ghosted me as though I'd never existed. My phone buzzed non-stop with social media alerts, each new message more hostile than the last. "You're washed up before you even started. Crazy bitch, get help. Junk. Stop lying for attention. Anti-Semitic trash. I hope you rot." My blood ran cold at how easily strangers flung vile accusations, each word another stab wound. Part of me wanted to respond, to scream the truth at them, but I knew it would only feed the fire. The narrative had been set, and I was powerless to stop it. My agent dropped me with a curt email, citing unprofessional behavior and not wanting to jeopardize her industry relationships. Even my so-called friends in LA vanished. It felt like living in a glass cage, everyone peering in, passing judgment on a spectacle I couldn't control. That night, I was jerked out of a restless sleep by an odd cracking sound echoing through my apartment. My heart nearly leapt out of my throat. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the cramped living room. I forced myself out of bed, my spine rigid with dread. I flicked on a lamp. Nothing was out of place at first, but as I neared the window, I saw it. A series of jagged lines etched into the glass. My stomach dropped. The symbol was unmistakable. I'd glimpsed it on pendants, in the journal, in half-hidden tattoos peeking from under partygoers' sleeves. A circle split by crooked angles, something that made my skin crawl. It hadn't been there before I went to bed. My veins turned to ice. I pressed my hand to the carving, shaking so hard my nails scraped the glass. Who could have done this? The window was still locked from the inside. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a cult symbol carved into my window. I could practically hear them laughing, or worse, dismissing me as a paranoid lunatic. Still, desperation won out. I dialed 911, rambling about a break-in. 2 uniformed officers showed up, glancing around the dingy apartment with utter disinterest. One of them jotted a few notes, then shrugged. "Could be neighborhood kids messing around," he said. I caught the way he eyed me, taking in my disheveled hair, the tremor in my voice. He didn't believe me, and after 5 minutes of perfunctory questioning, they left. My head pounded with anxiety. They, the circle, the patron, whoever was behind this, were tightening the noose, showing me how easily they could reach into my life, sabotage my reputation, and rattle my sanity. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under my feet. That was when my phone rang. Mom. My heart thumped unevenly. The last time we'd spoken, she'd been worried but supportive, telling me to pray for guidance. Now I was terrified of what she might have heard. Swallowing back tears, I braced myself and answered. "Lily?" Her voice came through the static, trembling with tension. "Sweetheart, what in the world is going on with you? I read these horrible articles saying you're on drugs, that you hate. Oh my goodness, anti-Semitism? Lily, how can they say these things about my..." I closed my eyes. Guilt and relief tangled in my chest. "Mom, it's a smear campaign," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's trying to discredit me. But I promise, it's not true. None of it." Her silence stretched for a few seconds, thick with disbelief and worry. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "Really okay?" I let out a slow, shaky breath. I'm dealing with it. It's been rough. But I'm not using drugs or anything like that, I swear." She let out a sigh that crackled over the phone. "I don't like this, Lily. I don't like you being out there alone with no one to watch your back. I told your brother Mark about it. You know he's got that delivery run to Los Angeles tomorrow hauling those tractor parts. On his way back, he'll come get you if you're up for it. Maybe a break would do you good." For a moment, I felt a fierce pull of longing. Images of home flashed through my mind: Mom's warm kitchen, the smell of biscuits in the oven, the endless fields where I used to run barefoot as a kid. But then the fear clawed at me. If I leave, the patron might turn on my family. Or what if they follow me? Bring this evil back home? My chest went tight. "Mom, I'm not sure," I murmured. "I don't want to drag Mark into this mess. It's complicated." My vision blurred with tears I struggled to hold back. "It's safer for everyone if I stay here and try to handle it." "That's nonsense," she insisted, her tone more forceful than I expected. "I raised you to know better than to lie to your mama, Lily. You're not safe there. I can hear it in your voice. Let Mark take you somewhere you can rest, get your head straight, and figure out your next move. Promise me you'll think about it?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Okay, I'll think about it," I lied, knowing full well the possibility of leaving might be the only rational lifeline I had left. But a sick dread coiled in my stomach at the idea of my brother barreling into this nightmare. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. Mom exhaled slowly, like she was trying to push out all the worry trapped in her lungs. "All right, sweetheart. I love you. We all do. Just keep your phone on, okay? Mark'll call you tomorrow." "I love you too," I whispered, hanging up before the trembling in my voice betrayed how close I was to breaking down completely. I set the phone aside, heart pounding. The bitterness of fear mixed with the fleeting sweetness of my mom's concern. The idea of leaving gnawed at me. Could I really afford to stay in a city that felt more and more haunted by each passing day? But the alternative of risking my family's lives by drawing them into the patron's orbit seemed even more terrifying. A breeze blew in from the window, rustling the edges of that sinister carving. My reflection hovered there in the pane, superimposed over the symbol. I looked half-crazed, all dark-rimmed eyes and pale cheek, unrecognizable from the bright-eyed girl who'd first stepped off that bus. I pressed a shaky hand to the glass. They haven't beaten me yet, I told myself, though my own voice sounded small in my head. But the city's lights beyond my window felt oppressive tonight, as if every bulb was another watchful eye. And just below that hum of electricity, I could sense the patron's presence like a razor-thin blade hovering inches from my throat. The phone call had offered a sliver of hope, yet it also made one thing crystal clear. My family was in the crosshairs now, and if the circle demanded a final offering, I had no doubt they could and would reach across state lines to enforce. Alone in the flickering light of my living room, I vowed silently, I'll find a way to fight back. But for the first time I truly wondered if some darkness was simply too vast to outrun, whether I was destined to become just another cautionary tale in Hollywood's long history of shattered dreams. The black etchings on the window seemed to leer in agreement. The next night I was jerked awake to the shrill ring of my phone echoing through the cramped apartment. My mind, still tangled in the remnants of a nightmare, struggled to catch up. The clock on my bedside table read 5:14 a.m. in neon red. Who calls at this hour? My heart thudded against my ribs, a dull, insistent drumbeat. Scrubbing at my sleep-heavy eyes, I fumbled for the phone. The screen showed Dad, and my stomach tightened. My father rarely called me directly. He always left that to Mom, who was more comfortable navigating emotional waters. For him to be calling, something must be wrong. A sense of dread pooled in my gut. Hello? My voice came out in a raspy whisper, my throat still thick with the dregs of uneasy sleep. Lily. Dad's voice cracked, so raw and grim that I barely recognized it at first. I sat up straighter, adrenaline wiping away any leftover grogginess. It's Mark. There was an accident. My grip on the phone tightened so hard I thought the plastic might crack. What happened? Is he okay? The questions tumbled out in a breathless rush. Even as I spoke, a horrific image materialized: twisted metal, shattered glass. My brother's face, slack and pale. I shook my head, as if that might banish the thought. He was on his way to work, Dad said, voice shaking. Head-on collision with an 18-wheeler. The doctors. They're not hopeful. Your mom and I are at the hospital now. Everything shifted in an instant. The cramped walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me, the flickering hallway light outside my door casting unnatural shadows across the carpet. My skin pricked with cold sweat despite the stifling air. I'm coming home, I blurted, mind racing. I had maybe $200 to my name, but I'd figure it out: credit card, borrowed cash, anything. I'll book a flight as soon as I hang up. Dad, I'm so sorry. His sigh vibrated with heartbreak. He was supposed to call you about picking you up, you know, he said, words quivering. He was so worried, Lily. We all were. Please, just get here, okay? Okay, I managed, barely above a whisper. Hang in there. I'll be on the next flight. As soon as I ended the call, the hush of my apartment felt oppressive. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I stared at the phone in my hand, 1,000 thoughts colliding in my head. It can't be a coincidence, my mind hissed. Not after all that's happened. Not after the patron demanded a sacrifice. I clenched my teeth, bile rising in my throat. Is Mark paying the price because I refused? I tried to swallow down my panic. No, I shook my head. No, accidents happen every day. But deep down, I couldn't shut out the gnawing suspicion that this accident was the circles doing a warning, or worse, some twisted form of retribution. After all, Mark had offered to pick me up. He was entangled in my business now, however innocently. My eyes blurred with tears as I hunted for my wallet and suitcase. I moved on autopilot, shoving clothes into a battered carry-on without caring if they matched. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's easy grin, the way he used to ruffle my hair and call me kiddo, even though I was only a couple years younger. My chest squeezed painfully. If I lost my brother, if they took him from me, how would I ever live with myself? No, don't think that way. I forced my mind back to the present. Focus on the practical. Plane ticket, get a cab to LAX. Figure everything else out once I'm home. I wrestled the zipper of my suitcase, the metal teeth snarling like a rabid dog. Tears slipped down my cheeks, hot and stinging, but I ignored them. Survival mode kicked in, the same fight-or-flight instinct that had kept me going this long. Then, a stuttering flash of memory. The bonfire, the circle of chanting figures, Jack pressing my hand as the smoke curled around us. Burn your past. And later, the journal's dire warnings. The final offering must be personal, someone cherished. The patron was ancient, malevolent, hungry. If it couldn't claim me, perhaps it would devour someone I loved instead. My heart hammered, a sick twist of panic clawing at my inside. Enough, I hissed to the silent walls. My voice sounded alien in the stillness. I won't let them have him. Even as I spoke, the shadows seemed to thicken, as though something sinister was listening, lurking just out of sight. A lamp flickered on the bedside table, casting a jagged slice of light across the floor. I kept expecting to feel a presence brush the back of my neck, some intangible darkness, a specter from my nightmares. But nothing appeared. Zipping my carry-on shut, I checked my phone for flight options. The nearest departure was in 2 hours, but the price made my stomach flip. Screw it, I have no choice. My hand hovered, half expecting my credit card to be declined, but the transaction went through. For a moment, relief warred with dread. I'm going home, I told myself, trying to cling to that single certainty. I called a rideshare. Waiting those 10 minutes for the driver felt like an eternity. Every creak of the building or rustle of wind outside made me jump, my nerves raw from lack of sleep and constant fear. My phone, clutched in my sweaty hand, remained silent. No new texts, no calls. Part of me wanted to hear Dad's voice again, just to know Mark was still alive, but I couldn't bring myself to ring him. In the back of my mind, a voice warned, "Any second now, you might find out your brother's gone." I swallowed hard, forcing the thought away. When the driver finally buzzed from the parking lot, I grabbed my bag and stepped out of my apartment. The corridor was deserted, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I thought I saw movement at the far end, a fleeting silhouette. My heart lurched. "Hello?" My voice echoed. No answer. My pulse thundered in my ear. I hurried to the elevator, stabbing the button. Every moment stretched like taffy, dread saturating the air. In the lobby, the cracked floor tiles glimmered in the weak overhead lamp. Outside, the rideshare driver leaned on a battered sedan, checking his phone. I raced over, hopping into the back seat without a word. He eyed me in the rearview mirror, obviously noticing my trembling hands and red-rimmed eyes, but said nothing. The silence during that ride to the airport was deafening. We passed neon signs, shuttered storefronts, and billboards flaunting celebrities' perfect faces that might very well be part of the circle that had my life in its grip. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms, trying to stay grounded. At LAX, the terminal lights seemed too bright, too clinical. Automated voices droned flight updates as I wove through the crowd of bleary-eyed travelers. Every so often, I'd glimpse a security guard or a fellow passenger looking at me oddly, and paranoia flared. Did they recognize me? Did they know about the smear campaign, the accusations of drug use, bigotry, insanity? Or, worse, could they be one of them? My mind churned in circles, suspecting everyone and trusting no one. Only once I'd checked in did I find a moment to catch my breath. Standing in line at security, I fished out my phone. No new calls. My heart clenched. Dad had promised to keep me updated. Maybe he's busy. Or maybe. No, don't go there. Don't let the patron's shadow claim your thoughts. Not yet. By the time I collapsed into the stiff airport chair at gate 31, I felt hollow, like every emotion had been scraped out of me. An announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, instructing passengers to line up for boarding. I shouldered my carry-on and moved toward the gate, my body running on pure adrenaline. Each step felt like it belonged to someone else. My brain spun with grim possibilities. What if Mark's gone before I arrive? What if he was the sacrifice? Somewhere in the back of my mind, I recalled Dad's broken words. The doctors, they're not hopeful. A chill rattled my bones. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer in a voice so faint I scarcely heard it myself. Praying. After all I'd seen, all the dark rituals and twisted symbols, I had no idea if anyone was even listening. But I prayed anyway. I prayed that I could hold my brother's hand again. I prayed that leaving LA might break the patron's hold, even if only a little. And I prayed, above all, that I hadn't already damned us all by refusing to offer up a life. Because if I had, then Mark's blood was on my hands as surely as if I'd driven that truck myself. I boarded the plane, heart hammering in my chest, the city's neon ghosts flickering through my mind's eye. As I buckled my seatbelt, the aircraft cabin felt claustrophobic, the recycled air thick with tension, but no matter how suffocating it seemed, a worse darkness awaited me if I stayed behind. This flight felt like a desperate leap towards something unknown, with no guarantee of safety on the other side. As the plane's engines roared to life, tears gathered at the corners of my eyes. Please, God, let Mark hold on just a little longer. The wings shuddered, and we lifted off. Los Angeles shrank below, a glittering maze of lights, concealing horrors I could scarcely comprehend. I wondered if the patron could still reach me thousands of miles away. My chest ached with the realization that nothing, no distance might keep me, or my loved ones, safe. I shut my eyes against the rising sun, pressing my forehead to the cool window. The plane's ascent rattled my bones, and I clung to the faint hope that going home would at least let me stand by Mark's side, whatever was to come. At that moment, I understood the depth of my desperation. I would risk anything, my career, my reputation, even my soul if it meant saving my brother from the darkness that had ensnared me. Yet, a single question gnawed at me, cold and unrelenting. If the patron demanded a life in exchange for my refusal, has it already collected? By the time the plane touched down, my insides felt like they'd been twisted into a permanent knot. I barely remember stumbling off the aircraft and making my way through the terminal, heart pounding as I pushed past travelers and families reunited with warm embraces. My father's call had been brief. "We're at County General," he'd said, voice hollow, and then the line went dead. That was enough. I didn't wait for baggage claim. I left my suitcase rotating on the carousel, sprinting outside to hail the first taxi I could find. County General Hospital loomed at the end of a long concrete driveway lined with skeletal trees. Under the fluorescent glare of security lights, its glass doors slid open like jaws, swallowing me into a sterile corridor that smelled of antiseptic and suppressed panic. My footsteps echoed on the scuffed linoleum. White coats and pastel scrubs rushed back and forth, faces etched in professional detachment. Overhead, fluorescent bulbs buzzed and flickered, lending a nauseating pallor to everything they touched. I found my parents in the ICU waiting room, a cramped space with battered chairs and a vending machine humming loudly in the corner. Mom sat hunched over, eyes rimmed red and glossy with tears long spent. Dad stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, his knuckles white. The moment they saw me, Mom burst into fresh sobs. "He's this way," Dad said quietly, voice cracking. I followed him through a set of double doors, the hush of the corridors broken only by the mechanical beeps and whirs of life support machines. Every beep made my skin crawl. A cold shiver ran through me as I glimpsed the other patients in curtained cubicles, faceless silhouettes, battling their own emergencies. Then we reached Mark's room, and in that moment, I understood the true depth of the word helpless. He lay motionless on a narrow hospital bed, a tangle of tubes and wires snaking out from under the blankets, linking him to blinking machines and IV stands like some grotesque puppet on a stage of blinking lights. His face was swollen and mottled with bruises, one eye hidden beneath bandages. An oxygen mask clung to his skin, fogging slightly with each ragged breath. My stomach lurched at the sight of his leg, heavily cast and suspended by a metal frame, and the faint whir of the ventilator hissed like a silent accusation. "You did this." I forced myself to approach. My eyes stung from the chemical smell of disinfectant and the underlying copper tang of dried blood. I reached for Mark's hand, gingerly wrapping my fingers around his. It was cold, unresponsive. A memory flickered in my head. Mark giving me a piggyback ride through the cornfields when we were kids, laughing as I yelled for him to go faster. I swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "How did this happen?" I whispered, voice trembling. Dad touched my arm and guided me toward the corridor, away from the beeping machines and that steady, horrible hiss of the ventilator. The hallway felt claustrophobic, every door promising more tragedy. With a heavy sigh, Dad leaned against the wall, fatigue etched in every line of his face. "He was on the road to work," he began, his voice barely above a hush. "They say he must have drifted into the wrong lane or she did, nobody's sure yet. The other driver was a young nurse, just off her shift. She didn't survive." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Police released her name, Anna Reeves. Does that ring a bell?" My throat turned to sandpaper. Anna Reeves. Blood thumped in my ears and I had to steady myself on the wall. "Wait. What did you say her name was?" My voice came out in a ragged whisper. "Anna Reeves," Dad repeated, frowning. "Honey, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I had seen a ghost, in a manner of speaking. Anna Reeves. That was the name of the nurse character I'd played in my very first booking after those unsettling rituals began an indie short film about a haunted hospital. I'd studied the script obsessively, the name, Anna Reeves, practically etched into my mind. And now here she was, a real person, a nurse, dead in a head-on collision with my brother. My heart kicked against my ribs like a caged animal. Suddenly the hallway felt too bright, the stench of disinfectant cloying in my nostrils. This couldn't be a coincidence. The patron, the circle, they wanted a sacrifice. They demanded a loved one. I hadn't complied. "This is your fault," hissed a voice in my head. "This poor girl died, and Mark is hanging on by a thread, all because you wouldn't play along." Dad's eyes were full of worry. "Lil, talk to me." I couldn't bring myself to explain the twisted truth. I never met her. I wanted to scream. But I played her. I became her in a film, right after I bound my soul to something evil. My lips moved soundlessly. No words forming. What am I supposed to say? The patron's web was tangled around everything in my life now. This was an orchestrated nightmare, each horrific detail more damning than the last. "Did the police say anything else?" I finally forced out, voice cracking. Dad shook his head. "Just that it was a head-on collision. They're investigating who crossed the center line first. Mark was unconscious at the scene. They had to cut him out with the jaws of life." He closed his eyes, a tremor running through him. "He's in a bad way, Lily. Doctors aren't sure if he'll pull through." A strangled sob bubbled up from my throat. My father opened his arms, and for the first time since I was little, I collapsed against him, letting his solid presence hold me upright. My tears soaked his shirt, my shoulders shaking as I struggled to piece together some semblance of reason. The patron wanted blood. If Mark had died, I'd know for sure it was collecting. But he's alive, hanging by a thread. Is it toying with me? An image clawed into my mind, the symbol carved into my apartment window, mocking me from the glass. That dark shape in the mirror, the vile hush that fell at those parties when I approached. Why spare Mark's life? My thoughts whirled. Could the entity be torturing me by keeping him in limbo, letting me watch him suffer? Or was it possible the media was right, and I was spiraling into paranoia, connecting random dots to weave a horror story in my head? Every fiber of my being screamed that this was real, that it all tied back to the rituals I'd taken part in. But doubt curled in the corners of my mind like a hungry serpent. Am I losing it? Dad gently disengaged, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Come on, let's get you a cup of coffee. The doctor said they'll let us know if there's any change." I shook my head fiercely. "I want to stay with Mark." "You can't help him by falling apart," he said, voice cracking with a kindness that nearly broke me further. "We'll come right back, I promise." Reluctantly, I let him guide me toward the bland waiting area, my eyes straying to the door behind which my brother lay, surrounded by cold machines that breathed for him. Each step felt like walking deeper into some perverse dream, my sense of reality eroding under the weight of the patron's looming presence. As the automatic doors hissed shut behind us, I felt the desperation pool in my stomach, a bitter acid of guilt and anger. Anna Reeves, the nurse I'd portrayed in a harmless film, dead in a collision with my brother. The same name, the same profession. This is no coincidence. My heart pounded with realization. The patron has me locked in its claws, and if I can't find a way out, it will crush everyone I love, one tragedy at a time. The corridors stretched before us, a bleak pathway littered with the moans of wounded souls and the ghosts of lost. I tried not to think about the way Mark's eyes were swollen shut, or how each beep of the machines might be the last. Yet the memory lingered, throbbing in my head. The patron was out there, grinning in the shadows, and I was powerless to stop it. Or was I? As we reached the vending machines, I realized one thing with grim certainty. If Mark died, I'd never forgive myself. And if he lived, I'd go to any lengths, do anything to break this curse and protect. But a cold question haunted me. What if the patron demanded a different life instead? Am I willing to pay that price? The answer churned in my gut, like poison, reminding me there might be no way out of this pact except through blood and anguish. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, flickering just for a moment, casting jagged shadows across the floor. I swallowed hard, feeling every nerve in my body vibrate with tension. And despite the lingering possibility that I was going mad, I knew one thing beyond all doubt. If I didn't act soon, the patron would make sure my brother was only the first in a long line of casualties. Dad placed the paper cup of coffee into my hands as we returned to the waiting room, that cramped, somber space smelling of anxiety and disinfectant. I tried to say thank you, but the words stuck in my throat. Everything felt off kilter, as if my equilibrium had been shattered the moment I'd laid eyes on Mark, battered and clinging to life in that ICU bed. I stared at the steam rising from the coffee, the swirling heat patterns almost hypnotic. Memories assailed me. The moment I stepped off the bus in Los Angeles, starry-eyed and naive, the first audition I blew, the second one I nailed, the parties, the bonfires, the deal, all of it spiraling in my mind like a sick montage of mistakes. My chest tightened. Why did I ever think my dreams were worth such a horrendous price? My dad hovered nearby, unsure of what to do. He tried to meet my eye, but I couldn't face him, not when guilt crushed my ribs like an iron band. I pretended to take a sip of the coffee. It tasted bitter, metallic. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to vomit. Part of me wished I could throw up every last vestige of Hollywood's taint, rid myself of the patron's vile influence. But there's no physical purge for a soul that's already stained. A heavy silence pressed on us. Mom stood a few feet away, arms folded protectively against her chest, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. Dad reached for her shoulder, murmuring something. She shook her head, voice trembling as she said, "I just want to see my boy well." Dad sighed, giving her a gentle squeeze. Then he turned to me, clearing his throat. "Sit, Lily. Try to rest." But I couldn't. Every nerve in my body rebelled at the mere idea of staying still. Something inside me insisted that Mark needed medicine. It wasn't a logical or rational thought, more like an alarm screaming in my head, each pulse of it intensifying until my skull felt ready to burst. "I have to go back to him," I muttered, setting the coffee down on a low table cluttered with outdated magazines. My mouth felt impossibly dry despite the scalding liquid I'd forced myself to take. Mom stirred, about to speak, but Dad motioned for her to stay put. "Let her go," he said softly. "She needs to be with Mom." A pang of gratitude coursed through me. I managed a tight nod, and then I was moving, my steps echoing in the corridor as I headed for the ICU. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their sterile brightness reflecting off pale green walls. My vision tunneled, focusing on the double doors at the far end. Beyond them lay mock machines, the promise of answers, at least, a chance to be at his side. I almost ran straight into a nurse pushing a cart, apologizing breathlessly as I sidestepped her. I barely registered the worried glance she threw me. All that mattered was reaching Mark's room. That guttural voice in my mind kept screaming, "He's calling for you. He needs you." The hall felt longer than before, each step a needle prick of tension stabbing my soles through my thin shoes. The second I crossed the threshold into Mark's cubicle, my chest constricted at the sight of him. The beep of his heart monitor was steady, but alarmingly slow. Tubes wove in and out of his broken body, an IV drip cast in pale blue shadow. I took the seat next to his bed, the metal legs screeching against the tiled floor. Gently, I placed my hand over his. I expected the same chill as before, that unnatural cold, but his hand felt just a bit warmer this time. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but I seized that tiny glimmer of hope. "Mark," I breathed, tears pushing against the back of my eyes. My fingers trembled atop his. The bandaging around his head concealed the worst of his wounds, but the bruises' vivid purples and angry reds spoke of violence, trauma. Each shallow rise and fall of his chest seemed like a battle waged against unseen forces. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, leaning forward until my forehead nearly touched the coarse fabric of the bedsheet. The smell of antiseptic and dried blood was overwhelming. I never meant for this to happen. God, I was so stupid. I thought I was just doing silly little rituals, burning tokens to let go of the past. You know me, Bible Belt Lily, always trying to be a good girl, never stepping too far off the path. I didn't realize I was stepping right into the jaws of something. My tears fell freely now, hot against my cheeks. The machines hissed and clicked, reading his vitals in cold, relentless precision. My brother didn't stir, his eyelids remained swollen and closed. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to keep speaking, as though sheer will could bring him back to me. They promised everything: fame, success, fortune. I should have known better. I did know better, deep down. And I guess part of me didn't care, because I wanted it. I wanted to prove I was more than some small-town dreamer. But not like this, I croaked, throat raw with emotion. Not at the cost of your life. A heavy silence followed. My sobs quieted, and I felt the room closing in, thick with unspoken terror. The overhead light buzzed, flickering momentarily. My skin prickled, goosebumps raising on my arms despite the warmth of the hospital. "Mark, I love you," I whispered. "Whatever it takes, I'll make this right. I won't let that thing take you, I swear." My vision blurred with tears, and I almost didn't notice the subtle twitch of his eyelids. But then I froze, his fingers jerked beneath mine, as though a faint current had passed through them. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. "Mark," I leaned in closer, eyes wide. "Mark, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered again, and then, impossibly, they parted. I swallowed a gasp. What I saw made my stomach twist into a knot so tight I thought I might be sick. His eyes were open, yes, but they were empty. Not in the sense of physical emptiness, but a haunting void, as though the light that once made my brother who he was had been ripped out and replaced with an obsidian darkness. Terror lanced through me, his gaze fixed on me, or rather, fixed through me, like he was peering into some unearthly realm beyond my face. This wasn't relief, wasn't the joyous reunion of siblings I'd prayed for. Something was wrong. Then, in a voice so cold it barely seemed human, Mark spoke. Or whatever was inside Mark spoke. The sound was low and resonant, like distant thunder echoing across a graveyard. It sent a chill racing down my spine, my breath caught in my throat. "Everything has a price," it said, lips forming the words slowly, deliberately. "And now, you will pay." That final word "pay" dragged out in a hiss that made my hair stand on end. The voice was nothing like Mark's usual warm tone. It was jagged, inhuman, as though something ancient used him as a macabre ventriloquist's puppet. A strangled cry escaped my lips, and I wrenched my hand away. My brother's eyes, wide and vacant, stared blankly into mine. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign of the protective big brother who teased me relentlessly but loved me fiercely. I glimpsed only an unfathomable well of darkness. No, 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 I stammered, trying to back away. The chair scraped the floor violently. My heart hammered so loudly, I thought it might burst. Mark, please, come back. This isn't you. A sharp mechanical scream erupted from the heart monitor, the sudden crescendo of alarms echoing in my skull. Red lights blazed above the bed, strobing like a warning from hell itself. Mark's body convulsed against the sheets, limbs flailing as though possessed by an electric current. No, I yelled, lurching to my feet. Nurses burst in from the hallway, barking orders. One of them grabbed the crash cart. Another tried to guide me out of the way. I clung to Mark's wrist, tears blurring my vision. He can't die. He can't. The machine's wail grew higher, shriller. A doctor shoved past me, injecting something into Mark's IV line. Words flew in a frantic volley. Clear the airway. Charging at 200. Pulse is dropping. My head spun. A nurse physically dragged me aside to let the team work, her face etched with a resigned compassion that told me she'd witnessed this kind of tragedy too many times before. I caught a glimpse of my father at the doorway, face slack with horror, Mom behind him clutching his arm. I tried to call out, but I couldn't form words. My entire being was frozen with dread, eyes pinned to Mark's face contorting in pain. The doctor pressed the defibrillator paddles to Mark's chest. His body arched grotesquely, then flopped back to the bed. Silence, then another shriek from the monitor. No heartbeat. The doctor repeated the motion, voice shaking as he barked, "Come on." Mark's body spasmed again, and for one agonizing moment, I swore I saw a flash of recognition, in his eyes a glimmer of my brother returning, drowning in that endless blackness. Then it was gone. The line on the heart monitor flatlined in a single, unbroken note. I screamed. Dad and Mom rushed in, Dad trying to shield Mom from the sight. My knees buckled, sending me crashing to the cold floor. The world around me spun, voices echoing in a frantic blur. "Call it," someone muttered in a heavy tone. Then the beep died away completely, replaced by that single piercing whine of a flatline. "No, no, no," I sobbed, arms wrapping around myself, as if I could hold in the shards of my breaking heart. The nurse let out a trembling sigh, tears glistening in her eyes. The doctor shook his head, placing a hand on Mark's now still chest. "It's over," he whispered, defeat weighing every syllable. Mark lay motionless, bruised and battered body splayed under harsh fluorescent light. The entity that had spoken through him was gone, perhaps it had never truly left, simply withdrawn. Around the bed, my parents' keening sobs joined my own, forming a tragic chorus. Somehow, I forced myself up, lungs burning as I dragged in each breath. I hovered over Mark, pressing my hands against his unresponsive face. He felt cold and waxy, a lifeless shell of the man he'd been. Why him? My mind screamed. Why not me? But the answer slithered inside me, dark and cruel. Because you made the deal. Dad tried to comfort me, but I jerked away, stumbling into the nearest wall. I wanted to vanish, to peel my skin off and crawl out of my own existence. Mom stood there, sobbing into a trembling fist, her eyes wild with agony. The overhead lights seemed too bright, mocking the darkness devouring my soul. The doctor mumbled something about needing to record the time of death. Nurses began their grim tasks removing IV lines, draping Mark's body with a sheet. I let out a shuddering gasp, and that was all it took for the last threads of my resolve to snap. It's my fault. The words pounded through me with the force of 1,000 hammers. I brought him into this. I let the darkness in. I wanted to break, to cease existing, rather than face what I'd unleashed. My vision dimmed, black spots creeping at the edges again. No, I whispered, staggering. No more. I can't fight this. I won't. It's too strong. A sob choked me, and I sank to the floor once more, burying my face in my hands. It's over. Mark was dead, and with him, every ounce of determination I'd had left. I felt Dad's arms slide around my shoulders, Mom's wail at my side. But none of it mattered. None of it could pierce the suffocating weight of guilt. A hollow, hateful presence lingered around us, as if the patron itself loomed in the corner, savoring my despair. I gave in to the darkness then, letting it crush me under its implacable weight. There was no fight left in me, no faith in redemption or second chances. I let the tears and the emptiness swallow me whole, my brother's lifeless face etched into the back of my eyelids. The last echo of that demonic voice rattled my skull. Everything has a price, and now you will pay. I had paid. Oh God, how I had paid. And so I let go, sinking into despair so profound that I wondered if I'd ever surface. My world ended with Mark's final breath, and I had neither the will nor the strength to stand against the horror any longer. As the alarm's shrill cry faded, replaced by the thunder of my own heartbeat in my ears, I collapsed into my father's arms. There's nothing left. The tears kept coming, my vision tunneling. All I felt was grief and endless, agonizing void where hope had once lived. Then my mind slipped into a storm of nightmares, even as my eyes remained open. Because I knew, with a certainty as cold as death itself, the patron had claimed its due, and everything I'd believed about resisting it had died along with my brother. 12 months have passed since my brother took his last breath on that cold hospital bed. 12 months since I watched the life drain from him, carrying with it the last of my hope. I still remember how his eyes looked vacant, as though a yawning void had taken his place. That image lingers, a ghost haunting every corner of my mind. The funeral felt like some terrible fever dream. It rained the day we laid Mark to rest, thick droplets slapping the earth like 1,000 tiny fists of anger. A cheap green awning sagged above his coffin, shielding it from the downpour. My father and mother stood on either side of me, their grief carved into their faces. I wanted to comfort them, to say something profound. But all I managed was a choked whisper. As the priest mumbled final rites, the sound of dirt thudding onto the polished wood resonated through my bones. Each dull thump felt like a hammer driving nails into a coffin that contained far more than Mark's bottomy belief in a benevolent world was in there, too, sealed away with him. For 6 months after that, I crumbled. There's no other word for it. I let myself become a husk, roaming through the house in sweat-stained pajamas, ignoring phone calls, ignoring the world. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two without nightmares slithering up from the depths of my guilt. When I did manage to drift off, I found myself reliving that hospital scene, the beeping machines, the sudden flatline, Mark's eyes black, hollow. Sometimes, I woke up screaming. Alcohol became my escape, a slow poison that dulled the claws of my memories. I'd down whiskey until my throat burned, welcoming the numbness as it spread through my body. Mom and Dad tried to help God. They tried so hard, but I pushed them away, wallowing in my own private hell. My father took to spending his evenings on the porch swing, staring into the distance like he expected Mark to walk up the driveway at any moment. My mother prayed harder than ever, leaving open Bibles all around the house, as if the printed words could ward off the evil that claimed my brother. I don't know exactly when my paranoia started. Maybe it was always there, waiting, after that thing used Mark's dying breath to speak to me. I'd catch myself checking the windows at night, half convinced I'd see that symbol etched into the glass again. Or, I'd walk down the street and swear I felt eyes on me, following my every step. A single misplaced shoe in the hallway could send me into a spiral of panic. Once, I found a stray piece of paper on my... I screamed. Dad and Mom rushed in, Dad trying to shield Mom from the sight. My knees buckled, sending me crashing to the cold floor. The world around me spun, voices echoing in a frantic blur. "Call it," someone muttered in a heavy tone. Then the beep died away completely, replaced by that single piercing whine of a flatline. "No, no, no," I sobbed, arms wrapping around myself, as if I could hold in the shards of my breaking heart. The nurse let out a trembling sigh, tears glistening in her eyes. The doctor shook his head, placing a hand on Mark's now still chest. "It's over," he whispered, defeat weighing every syllable. Mark lay motionless, bruised and battered body splayed under harsh fluorescent light. The entity that had spoken through him was gone, or perhaps it had never truly left, simply withdrawn. Around the bed, my parents' keening sobs joined my own, forming a tragic chorus. Somehow, I forced myself up, lungs burning as I dragged in each breath. I hovered over Mark, pressing my hands against his unresponsive face. He felt cold and waxy, a lifeless shell of the man he'd been. Why him? My mind screamed. Why not me? But the answer slithered inside me, dark and cruel. Because you made the deal. Dad tried to comfort me, but I jerked away, stumbling into the nearest wall. I wanted to vanish, to peel my skin off and crawl out of my own existence. Mom stood there, sobbing into a trembling fist, her eyes wild with agony. The overhead lights seemed too bright, mocking the darkness devouring my soul. The doctor mumbled something about needing to record the time of death. Nurses began their grim tasks removing IV lines, draping Mark's body with a sheet. I let out a shuddering gasp, and that was all it took for the last threads of my resolve to snap. "It's my fault." The words pounded through me with the force of 1,000 hammers. I brought him into this. I let the darkness in. I wanted to break, to cease existing, rather than face what I'd unleashed. My vision dimmed, black spots creeping at the edges again. "No," I whispered, staggering. "No more. I can't fight this. I won't. It's too strong." A sob choked me, and I sank to the floor once more, burying my face in my hands. It's over. Mark was dead, and with him, every ounce of determination I'd had left. I felt Dad's arms slide around my shoulders, Mom's wail at my side. But none of it mattered. None of it could pierce the suffocating weight of guilt. A hollow, hateful presence lingered around us, as if the patron itself loomed in the corner, savoring my despair. I gave in to the darkness then, letting it crush me under its implacable weight. There was no fight left in me, no faith in redemption or second chances. I let the tears and the emptiness swallow me whole, my brother's lifeless face etched into the back of my eyelids. The last echo of that demonic voice rattled my skull. "Everything has a price, and now you will pay." I had paid. Oh God, how I had paid. And so I let go, sinking into despair so profound that I wondered if I'd ever surface. My world ended with Mark's final breath, and I had neither the will nor the strength to stand against the horror any longer. As the alarm's shrill cry faded, replaced by the thunder of my own heartbeat in my ears, I collapsed into my father's arms. There's nothing left. The tears kept coming, my vision tunneling. All I felt was grief and endless, agonizing void where hope had once lived. Then my mind slipped into a storm of nightmares, even as my eyes remained open. Because I knew, with a certainty as cold as death itself, the patron had claimed its due, and everything I'd believed about resisting it had died along with my brother. 12 months have passed since my brother took his last breath on that cold hospital bed. 12 months since I watched the life drain from him, carrying with it the last of my hope. I still remember how his eyes looked vacant, as though a yawning void had taken his place. That image lingers, a ghost haunting every corner of my mind. The funeral felt like some terrible fever dream. It rained the day we laid Mark to rest, thick droplets slapping the earth like 1,000 tiny fists of anger. A cheap green awning sagged above his coffin, shielding it from the downpour. My father and mother stood on either side of me, their grief carved into their faces. I wanted to comfort them, to say something profound. But all I managed was a choked whisper. As the priest mumbled final rites, the sound of dirt thudding onto the polished wood resonated through my bones. Each dull thump felt like a hammer driving nails into a coffin that contained far more than Mark's bottomy belief in a benevolent world was in there, too, sealed away with him. For 6 months after that, I crumbled. There's no other word for it. I let myself become a husk, roaming through the house in sweat-stained pajamas, ignoring phone calls, ignoring the world. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two without nightmares slithering up from the depths of my guilt. When I did manage to drift off, I found myself reliving that hospital scene, the beeping machines, the sudden flatline, Mark's eyes black, hollow. Sometimes, I woke up screaming. Alcohol became my escape, a slow poison that dulled the claws of my memories. I'd down whiskey until my throat burned, welcoming the numbness as it spread through my body. Mom and Dad tried to help God. They tried so hard, but I pushed them away, wallowing in my own private hell. My father took to spending his evenings on the porch swing, staring into the distance like he expected Mark to walk up the driveway at any moment. My mother prayed harder than ever, leaving open Bibles all around the house, as if the printed words could ward off the evil that claimed my brother. I don't know exactly when my paranoia started. Maybe it was always there, waiting, after that thing used Mark's dying breath to speak to me. I'd catch myself checking the windows at night, half convinced I'd see that symbol etched into the glass again. Or, I'd walk down the street and swear I felt eyes on me, following my every step. A single misplaced shoe in the hallway could send me into a spiral of panic. Once, I found a stray piece of paper on my windshield, just a shopping receipt. But I stared at it for an hour, certain it contained hidden symbols or coded messages from the patron. My parents told me I was imagining things. Part of me wanted to believe them. Another part insisted nothing is ever a coincidence anymore. Through it all, I told myself I deserved the torment after all. Hadn't I courted evil in exchange for fame? Hadn't I danced in the flames of those rituals, thinking them nothing more than silly, bohemian theater? When I closed my eyes, I remembered the bonfires, the taste of smoke mingled with the tang of something coppery. Blood, my mind whispered. It was always blood. But I never spoke of that out loud. What good would it do now? Eventually, the house became too suffocating for all three of us. My parents tiptoed around me, and I was consumed by shame each time I saw the heartbreak in their eyes. I never discussed Mark's last words or that unholy voice. The darkness weighed on me until I felt a horrifying temptation to follow Mark into the grave, anything to escape my nightmare. One evening, after finishing half a bottle of cheap whiskey, I stumbled onto the porch and sank onto the wooden steps. A storm raged overhead, lightning splintering the sky. I stared into the swirling clouds, half mad with grief, and something inside me cracked. The wind whipped around, stinging my eyes with rain, and I screamed into the tempest, cursing the patron, cursing Hollywood, cursing myself. I don't know how long I raged, but when my voice gave out, a profound emptiness settled over me. I remember thinking, I can't keep doing this. The next morning, I woke up on the porch, soaked to the skin and shivering. My head felt like it was split in two, but something had shifted. A tiny spark of clarity flickered within me. Mark wouldn't have wanted me to waste my life in an endless cycle of self-loathing and cheap whiskey, nor did I want to keep breathing in this half-dead state. If I was going to live in for reasons beyond my comprehension, I was still here. It had to mean something. And so I chose to stand up, however unsteadily, and try to atone for what I'd done. The first thing I did was flush every drop of alcohol in the house down the drain. My mother watched, tears slipping down her cheeks. But this time they weren't just tears of sorrow. Maybe a shred of hope glimmered in her eyes. Dad threw his arms around me, and for a moment, we just held each other, hearts beating in sync under the kitchen's harsh fluorescent light. I still had nightmares, but I made myself face them sober. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart crashing against my ribs, but I'd tell myself, I can bear this. I sought therapy, though it took me weeks to muster the courage to dial the number. The first session left me trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks as I described losing my brother in a freak accident I secretly believed wasn't so accidental. I didn't talk about the patron or the rituals, but somehow I felt the dead weight in my chest lighten, just a little, at admitting how deep my guilt ran. Months crawled by. Spring arrived, bringing pale sunshine over the farmland where I'd grown up. I walked the fields sometimes, remembering Mark chasing me through the tall grass, letting me ride his shoulders when I was too tired to run. A pang of grief always followed, but I used those memories as fuel, a testament to how much he meant and still means to me. Eventually, I found myself writing, which surprised me more than anyone else. At first, it was just a few scribbled words in a notebook about Mark, memories, regrets, fleeting visions of him healthy and alive. Then, slowly, the words morphed into something else. Scenes of Hollywood parties, bonfires in the hills, cryptic symbols that plagued my dreams. I poured every drop of agony and anger onto those pages, describing the horrors I'd witnessed under the guise of shining lights and celebrity glamour. I wrote feverishly, reliving each step of my downfall in brutal, unflinching detail. The private gatherings, the burning tokens, the circle of unnaturally beautiful people whispering vile incantations in hushed corners. The moment I realized I'd traded more than just innocence for fame. And most painfully, the day I watched my brother die in that hospital room, his final words spoken by a presence older and darker than anything I'd believed in. I told myself it was just a diary, a catharsis. But as the pages multiplied, a new realization struck me. This could be a warning. If I cast it as fiction, maybe I could protect others from the same trap. People who dream of bright lights and applause shouldn't have to pay in blood. I've seen firsthand how merciless that city can be when you're no longer useful or when you threaten to reveal its hidden rot. So I kept writing, shaping my experiences into a story that might resonate with anyone, actors, dreamers, or even curious onlookers who've never stepped foot in Hollywood. I changed names and dates, disguised certain details. My own family reads each chapter, swallowing back tears and asking if it's too painful to keep going. Yes, it is, but it's also my atonement. If I can stop just one person from signing their soul away, then maybe Mark's death won't be completely in vain. I can't claim the nightmares are gone. The patron still inhabits my darkest corners, manifesting as flickers of shadow in the corner of my vision or an unsettling chill in my bones. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind moans outside, I swear I hear my brother's voice calling me, or that unholy rasp. Everything has a price. I have to remind myself that I'm still here for a reason, and that reason is to shine a light on the darkness I once embraced. I'm not naive. I know a self-published novel or even a modestly successful book won't single-handedly eradicate the evils lurking beneath Hollywood's polished surface. But if anyone picks it up, reads my words, and thinks twice before stepping into that glitzy viper's nest, maybe fewer souls will be lost. Maybe fewer siblings will end up in hospital ICUs, their eyes black with a presence not their own. 12 months have passed, and I'm still standing scarred, haunted, but determined. The rage I once directed inward has shifted into a purpose, to expose the illusions that tempt the unsuspecting. I'm willing to be ridiculed, labeled as eccentric or melodramatic. Let them laugh if it keeps just one person from dancing in the flame. On Mark's anniversary, we held a small gathering at his grave. The sky was overcast, spitting a light drizzle that turned the grass into a wet carpet of green. I placed a single white lily on the fresh headstone, my throat aching with unshed tears. Mom and Dad stood beside me, each in their own private grief. For the first time, I felt a solemn peace in my chest, not because I've moved on, but because I refused to let his death be the last note of this nightmare. That same evening, back in my childhood bedroom, I typed the last words of my manuscript. This is for you, Mark. The world might never believe what happened. They might shrug it off as fiction, a tall tale, but it's all I have to fight the malevolence that once sank its teeth into me. Will it be enough? I don't know. But I do know that I'm no longer the broken girl who collapsed on the ICU floor, my brother's blood staining my memory. I'm standing again and steady, but resolute. I owe Mark that much. I owe myself that much. Sometimes, I still feel the patron's presence slithering around my periphery, but I straighten my spine, clutch the cross my grandmother left me, and focus on the words I've written. Because words are power, in their own way a power I can wield for good. And if that power stops even one starry-eyed dreamer from stumbling into the pit I once tumbled into, I'll call it a victory worth bearing my scars for. This is my life now. Rebuilding, atoning, warning. The patron might lurk in the shadows, a toothy grin waiting to swallow my light again. But I'm not cowering anymore. I'm bracing for the fight. And if I fall, let me fall knowing I tried to save someone else from making the ultimate sacrifice, knowing that my brother's death, senseless and cruel as it was, sowed the seeds of a warning that might save a future Lily from the jaws of Hollywood's darkest secret. Because if I've learned anything in the past 12 months, it's that real terror isn't the shadow in a movie script or the jump scare on screen. It's the slow, insidious corruption that slips into our hearts when we crave fame beyond reason. And sometimes, the only way to survive that terror is to shine a glaring light in its face and say, I see you now, and I refuse to turn away.